My name is Russ Bryan. I'm a landscape architect with Neil Schaefer. Also here with me presenting today is David DeQuilla. He's with DD Consulting. He's a specific recreation consultant and retired Parks and Rec director with the City of Gulfport. Our Mayor, thank you for being here. Also, council members, thank you for your attendance. And Gia, thank you for being here too. And Dwayne, Parks Director, thanks for being here. If I missed any other staff, you'll have to excuse me. I appreciate the city, you all hiring us and allowing us to provide services to you. Also need to mention the USDA Rural Development Business Grant is what's providing the funding for this feasibility study. I mentioned myself with Neil Schaefer and David with DD Consulting. Our third team member is the University of Southern Mississippi Trent Lott National Center, which did a lot of economic impact studying and results provided in the report. Now the meeting agenda for tonight is basically in two parts. David and I have a presentation where we'll walk you through kind of the high points of the draft plan. And then I've got those high points printed out, and beginning over here to my left, you can kind of move through station to station to get a little deeper dive on the draft report. And again, that's going to be the highlights. Directly behind Gia is a full draft copy of the plan that you can flip through if you want to kind of see the nuts and bolts of it. And then just as a reference, I also brought the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. And so the second half of that meeting will be all moving from station to station. Dave and I will be milling around in the middle of the room. You can ask us questions and bounce things off of us if you want to. You'll be able to provide input with sticky notes at each of the tables. And there's also an input form located back here in the back right side of the room. But like I mentioned, the presentation will walk you through kind of the high points of the plan. First part is the purpose of the plan. It is a feasibility study and business plan for recreation facilities and sports tournaments. Now it's going to be different than a parks master plan. Parks master plan is based on visions and wants and what we'd like to have. Feasibility study is rooted in what you need, and in this case, what makes most financial sense, what you can build that will increase the local economy and will return funds back to you in the form of grabbing your portion of the sports tourism market within the Memphis metro area. So what the plan will do is provide your city elected officials, staff, and the recreation stakeholders the information needed to make strategic investments in recreational facilities and programming. It's a long-term plan. It's going to be a multi-year, multi-phase plan for improvements to improve your existing parks and rec facilities, and also new facilities intended to, first and foremost, improve the citizens' quality of life, but also, equally as important, create increased sales tax revenues, new jobs, and put Hernando in a stronger position in the region's sports tourism economy. Now, just to kind of reiterate a lot of those points, it's going to tell you what you need from a standpoint of what you should build to get the best return, and not necessarily what everybody really wants. Now, and once you build that tax base, I've mentioned that to the mayor and Ms. Brooks too, those things that you want, then you can start to formulate plans to do those as you build your tax base. Now, I'm going to ask David to come up and handle item B, review the planning process, walk you through a lot of the metrics that were applied to your existing facilities, talk through some of the process that we went through.
So in order to figure out where we're going, we have to figure out what you have, not only in facilities, but in your park staffing as well as your budget. So we did an existing parks assessment, we did an existing park management assessment, and we did an existing parks department budget assessment. So Russ and I came up, spent a couple days looking around facilities, walking through facilities, met with Dwayne and his staff, took an observation of your budget. And the first thing we did was take a real hard look at your existing park facilities. How we did this was by taking a standardized plan that's been used since 2003, where instead of it being a subjective, hey, this looks good, that looks good, we take everything and we make it an objective, number-based study. So we looked at several things. We looked at ADA compliance. We looked at the quality of the equipment. We looked at the attractiveness of the facility. We looked at the amenities. We looked at the safety. Looked at the condition. Looked at the number of fields and courts that you had. We looked to see if you had adequate signage. So those are objective things. Do your parks have these things? These are standards that are set forth by NRPA, the National Recreation and Parks Association, to say, hey, if you've got a facility, these are the things that you need to have. So when we started looking at those, it does become a little subjective at that point. Okay, yes, we have signage. Well, how does it look? Is it all in place? Or do you have a pole and the sign should have been there and it's missing? No, we're not ADA compliant. I can't get a wheelchair to that tennis court. I can't get a wheelchair to that pavilion. So at that point, each of those categories is assessed a number value. And in the report, you'll have background and all the background appendix and show you all when we did the scoring. But basically, what ends up happening is everything's ranked on a 1 to 4 scale, 1 being poor, 4 being excellent. So we take those numbers, take it into all of these multiple categories, and we come up with a composite score. So when we do the composite score, you get this. The scoring system's outlined to your right, and the composite scores, if it's less than a 1.149, it's 4, and then it ranks all the way back up through to excellent. We had 2 facilities that ranked 4. Both of those are standalone facilities. One is the basketball court. The other was the one field softball field. The softball field wasn't being used on a regular basis, you could tell. Might have had an occasional activity out there, but it wasn't being maintained like your other fields and your other properties were being maintained. The basketball court, there were some issues with drainage, some issues with accessibility, some issues with the court itself. So those were the only 2 facilities that rated 4. The rest of your facilities all rated good, fair, are excellent. So once we came through and started taking these facilities, we broke them down, gave them a composite rankings. Then as we started looking at ways to make improvements to those facilities, like Russ said, we were tying that back into the metric of economics and different things so that we could take those parks and take them to another level. And Russ will hit on those individually later in the presentation. The other thing we looked at was how do y'all compare to what the norm is? And the norms are taken from, again, going back to NRPA, it's the National Recreation and Parks Association. They have annual benchmarks that they put out, and the benchmarks we used were from last year for 2019. Based on their benchmarks, we found that there should be 10.1 acres per every 1,000 population. With our numbers that we got back from Hernando, what this equated out to back to us was that y'all need approximately 151 acres to 273 acres in park space. And again, your population, you have a base population of about 15.7. According to your marketing and strategy data for your downtown districts, you're serving anywhere within a 10-minute drive of about 27,000. But all those people aren't living and paying taxes in the city of Hernando. So kind of depending on how y'all want to look at it, do we want to serve that full population base, or do we just want to really make sure we're taking care of the citizens of Hernando? Either way you look at it, the city of Hernando is running a little bit short in the amount of acreage that's normally provided for recreational activities. Basically, you're at about the 76% range according to that 2019 metric. At a minimum, you want to add about 40 acres. The other metric that's in there is the number of parks, specifically parks per resident. In this category, you really want 1 park per 2,180 people. And Hernando hits the mark here. The number of parks that you have does serve the population that you have from a number standpoint. It's just the amount of acreage and amenities and some of the other things that need to be created is where the shortfall is. So the other thing that we did during this assessment was the supply and demand. let's look at what you have versus what the industry standard is for a city of this population. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting, and Russell will tag into this a little bit later on when we start talking about improvements and why we were pushing for some improvements in certain areas. There's an economic reason, but there's also a demand reason. Baseball and softball, right now you have 10 fields. Your demand for this, for a city of this size is 6 to 11 fields. So you're sitting about where you need to be. Are there improvements that need to be made to those fields? Yes. Are there some things that we need to do to make that a better experience? Yes. Aesthetically, condition of the fields, things that are around the field. But the number and quantity of what you have is the number and quantity of what you should have for a city of this size. Basketball, we noticed a deficiency in basketball. Again, that'll be addressed a little bit more with Russ later in the presentation. One of the issues is all of your courts too are outside. So you have no indoor basketball facilities within the city that y'all don't use, that y'all have as your own. You're involved in partnerships or cooperative agreements for use. Soccer, another area where you have 15 fields. Demand is on the high end is 8, so y'all are in good shape there. Tennis was a deficiency. If you'll note, y'all have 4. The demand is 6 to 11, so you're roughly 7 to 8 courts down on where we need to be with tennis in the area. Walking and jogging is a function of mileage. Having enough open recreational walking and jogging trails. We took into account only the ones that were associated directly with your parks. So we didn't take into account that you might have sidewalk areas that are being used as a walking area, but it's not part of your park system. So this is strictly within your parks. Demand is 5 to 9 miles. You currently have 2. The next 2 areas are spray parks. Your supply is 0, so we need to get you 1. Specifically playgrounds, not necessarily parks. Y'all were okay in the number of parks, but you were deficient in the number of playgrounds. And generally what we see in playgrounds is you want those playgrounds that are available for that toddler age as well as that mid-tier age. So y'all were addressing, in some areas you're addressing one and not the other. What you want to have is either a multifunctional playground piece of equipment that addresses both, or separate areas for lower age group and the mid-tier age group. And lastly, dog park, skate park, and y'all have 1, and the recommendation for a city of y'all size is 1. So y'all are where you need to be in that respect. So from a management perspective, we did the same thing. Everything that we did from an evaluation perspective is based on population. What has come back to the NRPA metrics and plugging in our numbers and working through where cities of your size are is that a city of this size should have 8.3 full-time equivalent staff for every 10,000 residents. Based on that, the city of Hernando should have about 12 and as many as 16 employees, depending on how you evaluate your service area. Right now you have 7. So I'm going to hit y'all with, hey, you need to improve the size of your park staff. I know there's a dollar figure attached to that. I know there's other things that are kind of like, oh, it makes people a little nervous, but we really need to take a hard look at the number of people you have on staff, the number of people you need on staff to do the things that you want to do. Not only doing the things that you want to do locally on a regular basis, but if you're going to do some of the things that we're going to talk about or make recommendations on with the feasibility study and look at tournament activities, bringing people in from out of town, you only get 1 chance to make a first impression. So the things that this staff does when somebody comes in for a tennis event, a baseball event, a soccer event, an equestrian event, whatever that might be, you're going to want to make sure that the facilities look good, that everything's the way it's supposed to be, that the tournament's handled the way it should be, the personnel's in place, you have enough people, professional people that have done these types of events and understand what it takes to bring these events, and they're all working together to make it happen. So, excuse me. So, you know, there's a balance. You're going to have the things that you need for the normal day-to-day operations, and then you are going to have some folks who are in here specifically to help you handle a sports event. I'm going to use an example of a sports facility. Y'all are familiar with South Haven. Generally, a facility like South Haven has a tournament manager that does nothing but handle the 35, 40, 50 events that come to that facility. They don't go out into the parks and work day to day. They don't do other things. Their responsibility is to network. The mayor, we were just talking before, there's a keeping up with the Joneses process. If you're getting into sports tourism, it's a business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. And if you're going to be in the business, then the framework and the thought process has to be business oriented. It's got to be, hey, what are we doing to not only get people in here the first time, how are we going to get them back, not only for another event, but how are we going to get them to come back and just hang around Hernando on a weekend they're not playing sports or doing an activity, come in here and spend some money. So this is your current management staffing chart for what you have. You have a director, you have a receptionist, assistant director, events coordinator, one athletic coordinator working with your assistant director, and then one maintenance worker and your maintenance supervisor, under your maintenance supervisor. So let's talk a minute just about staffing levels. What you currently have is 43% of your staffing is an administrative level. It's in director, assistant director, and receptionist. You got 29% in maintenance, and you got 29% in programming. The recommended levels are 25, 50, 25. Your administrative staff should be about 25% of your staff. If y'all were to up your staff to get it to what the norm would be, those additional positions would come in under maintenance. We'd add 4 additional FTEs, and would come in under programming, we'd add an additional 1 FTE. Now, whether those are all full-time employees, or whether you wanted to take a look at, hey, instead of adding 1 full-time programming person, Dwayne may say, man, it'd be better if we had 2 and we worked them seasonally, or we brought them in for certain events here or there. There are some ways to tweak this, but at the end of the day, in order to accommodate kind of the industry norm, colleagues can help assist you meet what you need to do. These are the recommended staffing levels that you should have, and as an organizational chart, it look a little bit something more like this. Your director would be big picture, working on how we're going to do these things, how we're going to bring in more events, how we're going to tie in with Main Street, how we're going to tie in with the Restaurant Association, how we're going to take all these things we want to do and make them work. Your assistant director, receptionist are taking care of your administrative day-to-day activities. And your assistant director really becomes your day-to-day operations person, with the director going out and figuring out how to recruit, help recruit for a tennis event, or help recruit for sponsorships, or those types of things. So what you have right now is you've got staff that are in administrative positions getting caught in day-to-day regular activities or maintenance or things that they don't need to be spending their time with. Your administrative level positions, your director, you want them out there looking at the big picture and figuring out where you're going next. And if they're caught in day-to-day operations, they can't do that. Real quick on the budget, we use your 2019 budget. Not going to break it down into a lot of detail. Everybody in here understands how budget works. Your revenues were $1.053 million. Your total expenses $1.024 million. So what that boiled down to from a millage standpoint, we'll get to that in just a second. So when we started looking at this metric through NRPA, the per capita expenditure should be about right at $79 per person. Where y'all are at in Hernando is down at $65 per person. So when you start looking at that metric of saying, hey, if we start spending what we should be spending per person, then that increases that budget. That gets you that $200,000 to $300,000 to start talking about those positions that you're talking about. I do understand. I worked in municipal government, retired 28 years. I lived it. I know the budgets are always tight. I also know that Parks and Recreation falls way behind Fire and Police, way behind Public Works, usually behind Engineering, behind every other little thing that you can find in Parks and Recreation at the bottom. So we understand that. The other thing is, from the city's perspective, there's the state code provides 2 mills for recreation. Based on the 2 mil number that we had, and if our number's off, I apologize, but the numbers that we had for y'all's 2 mil, basically the city is pumping about $216,000 additional dollars for Parks and Recreation. So what we're talking about is taking that 216 and bumping it up a little bit more, and particularly looking in the areas of personnel. So that's kind of big ticket number that we're looking at. So that's the areas of management, the facilities, and the budget. Russ is going to hop back in at this point, talk a little bit about our stakeholder meeting that we had back in November, and kind of get y'all back up to date.
Yeah, so the kind of the final bit of input before we started making any real recommendations was stakeholder input. We held a stakeholder input, like David mentioned, November of last year, late November. It was an open dialogue where we just simply had input forms. Dave and I were available to have dialogue. We also had 2 online surveys. One was just a general stakeholder input survey that was placed online. Got a lot of good feedback on. The spending and economic impact input was kind of a plan B. That was our partner, the USM Trent Lott Center, was planning to do a lot of face-to-face interviews at local events, local gatherings, where they could grab some information from out-of-towners who were in town spending, grabbing that type of information. Unfortunately, due to COVID, that didn't work out. That had to be gathered online too, and that's that second online survey. And then our second stakeholder meeting, of course, is today, where we'll get our final input and then wrap up the plan. As I mentioned, USM Trent Lott National Center took a look at the year market analysis. What they did is they analyzed the economic and demographic characteristics of the area, looked at things like population, unemployment, corporate presence, and of course lodging industry, which has a big role in bringing in people and having them stay. They evaluated pros and cons of existing sports and rec facilities within the area, including current usages, and looked specifically at tournaments within your area. Identified comparable and most of the time competitive facilities within your area, and then propose some recommendations based on all of that information. Now, the strengths from that market analysis assessment is Hernando's population. You're growing 4.7% by the end of 2029. Very healthy household income. Average household income is north of $69,000, which is well above the county average, way above the state average, and even a good bit above the national average. Employment is expected to increase by 12%, which again, way above the expected rate for the state, and even the national average. And that's by the year 2029. Great local schools, not any technical colleges or advanced college or universities within the immediate area, but close enough that it does have an impact on your ability to support tournaments and other sporting events. Location, of course, in Northwest Mississippi, convenient to a lot of major hubs like Memphis, Oxford, South Haven, Jonesboro, Jackson, and Tupelo. Very accessible for visitors. Memphis is a transportation hub with airport and rail. And then, of course, you're at the intersection of 2 interstates. So that makes it very easy to get to for visitors. And then a mild climate. You've got a long tournament season, so to speak. You can host events longer than a lot of other areas, particularly looking at the whole country. And then Hernando is seen as an affordable destination to come and spend the weekend. Now, the weaknesses, those are also things that have to be fed into the equation. There's a lack of a large corporate presence in Hernando, distance from other major cities like Nashville, Birmingham, Baton Rouge, those cities that are you're a little bit outside of the market for those travel teams. A big one is the lack of significant quality hotel properties, with basically one with 82 rooms, which I'm sure fills up quickly with your existing events. 2 other economy hotels, which may or may not be able to accommodate what they need to accommodate. And then some limitations in local traditional or visitor amenities. That's not to say that Hernando's brand is not good. I think you have a lovely downtown. You have a very quaint community. but some people are looking for other things as far as nightlife and entertainment go. And then the lack of an image as a sports event destination to these sports planners that David mentioned earlier that have a big say in where tournaments go. All right, so that all is kind of fed into the proposed improvements. And what we did as far as the proposed improvements, we looked at it in two ways. We looked at it comprehensively. And when you're able to move around the room, you'll see 11 site plans laid out on the table over here. So we identified improvements to each of your 11 parks and rec facilities. But most importantly, as far as the feasibility and business plan goes, we focused in on those key improvements to parks that are going to lead to more revenue, more slope of spending, more job creation. And those are the several we'll talk about here initially. The first one is an 8-court tennis complex at Milton Kirkendall Park. An 8-court complex there would allow you to either begin to host, kind of get into the system of hosting tournaments, or even partner with other existing tournaments with other existing complexes in your region, like in South Haven, Oxford, Senatobia. The great thing about Kirkendall Park is it's in close proximity to the West Commerce Street commercial corridor and your downtown square. And as people gather and play their mats, they've likely come down Commerce Street. They've seen both your big box retail and your boutique retail, and it's within close proximity to the square for a nice meal that evening. Another benefit in building it in an existing park is there's existing support infrastructure like parking, utilities, and the existing amenities down the hill at the track, with the walking track and the exercise equipment. So many these mega sports complexes are built out on the edge of the city. There's just an incredible amount of cost with infrastructure, the entrance road, utilities, parking, all those things you already have there at Milton Kirkendall Park. Additionally, you could have a larger tournament if you needed a 10 or 12 court complex. You've got a couple of courts in Church Street, which are in good shape, and then also the new ones there, newly resurfaced ones at Conger Park. Another one that we feel like kind of moves the needle from an economic impact standpoint is a new indoor multi-use recreation facility at Renaissance Park. This would be around a 30,000 square foot facility. We think it would need to be on the Highway 51 frontage there at Renaissance Park. That size square footage would include 2 full-size basketball courts, concession, restrooms, offices, meeting space, and storage. A facility like that would need its own director, would need other staff members for maintenance and programming. But what that would accommodate is that big 2-court multi-use space could accommodate your court sports that are currently being used, being hosted by the county school district facilities, but also host events like esports tournaments, archery tournaments, cheer and dance, training events like you were having earlier today when we were setting up. They tried to get us to come in there and get tased, but we declined the opportunity. Other private events like galas or receptions those are all things that are going to bring people from throughout the region. Again, the location, you direct them off of I-55 down your West Commerce Street corridor. They get a glimpse of the quaint downtown square and then head south to get to the facility. Plus, it's on 51. Thousands of people are going to be driving past it every day. So it would be a high-profile facility, again, intended to move the needle from an economic impact standpoint. The next one to talk about, trails and greenways. I brought the bike and ped plan that Neil Schaefer provided the city earlier last year, finished up last year. And you'll notice that on each of the site plans over here, there's going to be a dashed blue line. Those are the previously planned shared use paths or greenways. You'll see how how the two plans and studies kind of work together, connecting the parks using shared use paths. These should be a high priority because of the economic impact that is already occurring in the Memphis area. The Memphis Green Line, the Wolf River Trail, I can't think of the official name, but just the Green Line alone provides a $2.9 million economic impact in Memphis. So there's already a group of users, group of people coming to use the trails that are in place in Memphis. It's just a matter of extending their stay, coming south 20 miles, and spending time and money in Hernando. The next one is supporting and improving the Equestrian Arena at the Civic Center. Now, obviously, there would have to be some agreements between the landowners, the Civic Group landowners, and the Saddle Club, between the three entities that could really offer a big economic impact. Proposed improvements there would include a loop road around the arena that would have trailer and RV parking, RV hookups, as well as a new restroom and concession building, a horse barn with around 20 stalls, upgrades to the lighting, bleachers, and then other support amenities. Equestrian folks, they have a long season. They're well traveled. They travel almost every weekend of the year. And they do provide their own lodging oftentimes because they need to care for their livestock, but they're still spending money in those communities, buying a tank of diesel, buying food, supplies, buying meals, and like I said, they do provide their own lodging, but there would be a revenue stream related to lodging with a hookup fee to the RV in the RV spots. Now those are kind of the niche projects or the niche improvements that, based on our initial efforts, would provide you with a stronger stake in the recreation tourism market. Now, I'd like to rephrase something that I said earlier. I said we're going to give you what you need, not necessarily what you want. Now I totally messed that up. What I should have said is we're going to tell you what you need so that you can have everything that you want. And these next projects are, once you get the tax base going with those niche markets, those niche areas like tennis, equestrian, the indoor facility, when you get those up and running, then the tax base would then support playing catch up with baseball and softball. And that's the next one. And soccer, which is the slide after this one. But the things you need at the Civic Center, of course, is, again, working through the lease agreement, making sure you make safe investments on property that is owned by local civic organizations, but spending money looking at improved accessibility and user experiences there at the baseball fields. That's going to include more paved areas to connect users from parking to each field, from field to field, and then from fields to concession areas. New shade pavilions, safety netting around the playground area, and then from a field standpoint, like David mentioned earlier, just kind of better care for them, improved drainage, improved lighting, and increased maintenance on the infield and outfield turf areas. Soccer complex is similar in that you need better space delineation from what's a vehicular space, what's a pedestrian space, and what's a field space. So those need paved parking, vehicular turnarounds, sidewalk connections to each field and use area. Like I mentioned, better space delineation with bollards that would keep you from driving a vehicle onto the fields, or a combination of bollards and curb and gutter. Striped crosswalks so the drivers know where people are crossing. Lighting on the remaining fields that aren't lighted, lighting in the parking area so that visitors and kids, they're ready to go as soon as the mom and dad park. They hop out of the car and they're gone. So you need to be able to see those kids when they, are excited, not paying much attention. And then user experience stuff like shade pavilions, tree planting, improved signage along the way. Another one is a permanent stage and band shell at Conger Park. There's an existing wooden stage there that is used, but just a nicer stage to accommodate a band or an on-stage gathering. That could be used for, with the rigging on the band shell, it could be used for still movie night, it could be used for a band. I've mentioned the tennis complex. Maybe you have overflow over on the two new courts there, and those become your championship courts. You play your final matches there. You invest in nicer bleachers, and then the event sort of moves down the hill after those matches are over, and you have a band and you have food for sale. With the intent being that you're offering an event and you're offering a venue that is nicer and cooler than your competitors, the other tennis complexes, and so that those people go back to their communities and say, well, man, Hernando does it right. We had a big party after the championship, and they've stayed in your community, maybe even another night. Maybe the tournament usually ends on Saturday evening, and they drive home. Maybe they spend another night, and that's just that much more sales tax revenue, with that many more hotel stays. And then kind of the third area is really long term. David talked metrics of baseball and soccer, where you are where you need to be as far as population goes. But as demand and as you make these strategic investments, financial, economic impact investments through Parks and Rec, and as your tax base grows, then a new sports complex should be considered. It should first satisfy the needs of your residents, but then also designed to be able to be used as a tournament venue on the weekends. Again, the current demand is 12 fields and 5 soccer fields. That would need to be looked at once you're ready to move forward with it. But in addition to the capital improvements, you need to make sure that it's staffed properly, and it's staffed the way that David described earlier, that key marketing person that can make connections with tournament organizers. And don't forget sponsorships. Make good use of your local businesses and other private ways to sponsor things in your area. And now kind of the numbers. Based on these improvements, our USM partner provided us with economic impact numbers. And they provide us with a low, medium, and high range in a lot of different categories. That first one's revenue. With those improvements having 1.6 million, 5.6, 36 million in new revenues. As far as direct jobs created, 67, 288, or 656 on the high end direct jobs, with added value of 3 million, 7.4 million, or 16.8 million associated with those new jobs. Also, indirect jobs and induced jobs, 7, 20, or 45 indirect jobs, which indirect jobs are those created by suppliers, material suppliers, kind of one-off of the direct jobs. And then induced jobs, 5, 21, or 47, which induced jobs are the jobs created by the direct job creation, spending money in your community creating the induced jobs. So in all total, as far as jobs go, 80, 329, or 748 on the high end, and then economic impact 2, 7, or 16 million on jobs. And then it would generate, just with your regular sales tax, that new revenue would generate 49,157 or 357,000 annually for the city. Those are exciting numbers, but really the most important part of the meeting is the implementation strategies. And David's going to talk about that. So hang in there with us. This really is the most important part.
So several years ago, and Not sure how many of y'all were in office or living in Hernando at the time. I'm sure most of you were here. Y'all did the option of looking at biddings for the parks. You came out to try to sell a bond issue. I'm going to go by the media reports because that's what was accessible, and I didn't have to worry about it being somebody's opinion versus my. The media report was that y'all got a lot of resistance from your downtown association, restaurateurs in particular. Didn't want to see an increased tax on food and beverage within the city. What we've done is, when you start looking around the state, you've got the city of Pascagoula just did an $8 million sports complex based on a bond referendum. You've got the city of Brandon just did a reclamation of ball fields and put in a brand new amphitheater that they're running in conjunction with Mobile and Birmingham on a circuit for concerts. Well, pre-COVID, they were doing 7 to 12 concerts in the concert season. Number I had was they generate close to $700,000 in the first year, but they did that through bond and 1% tax. You got the city of Starkville building an $18.6 million facility right now on bond, both hotel and restaurant tax. Just down the road, Grenada's doing the same thing. So in order to be able to put yourself in a position to build these facilities, you've got to have a methodology and means and a way to generate the big ticket dollar that you need to make the improvements. So we're going to bring this to you again. We went and did some research on failed bond issues. Places that did fail bond issues came back and had success the second time. Again, I don't want to step on anybody's toes that may have been involved before, offend anybody, but these are strategic ways to sell a bond, to put it out there and get the support that you need to help make it work. Obviously, in the state of Mississippi, the board, city council, board of aldermen have to make their submittal to the state legislature. State legislature comes back and allows you to go out for vote. So in order to gain support, you must adequately demonstrate a substantial need. What we're hoping is with this feasibility study, with the study that Neil Schaefer's done on your pedestrian and walkways, that you have something that you could adequately take to the masses, put it on the table and say, here's the improvements that we can do. So you're demonstrating your need. There's direct public benefit, kind of the same line of thought here. You would now have the means, methodology, and the information to prove public direct benefit. What you want to do is take the time to educate the community on long-term and widespread benefits of the measure. I'm not 100% sure the length of time that y'all invested in doing your last plan. I did mention the city of Hattiesburg a minute ago. They're currently using their bond issue and doing 19 projects around the city of Hattiesburg. Get them in different wards. There are various projects from 40,000 up to 200,000. But they've taken their bond monies and spread them out. But before they did, it was a campaign. It was a plan. It was, hey, we're going to spend 6 or 8 months. We're going to identify, get all our stakeholders to the table. We're going to talk about what we're going to do. We're going to put it on paper. And here's what these improvements are going to do for you as a citizen, you as a business leader, you as a community leader. Voters are less likely to support it or approve a bond issue that they perceive as non-essential. Take the things that people need. Don't worry about the motors. Don't worry about the pieces of equipment. Look at the big picture. Look at, hey, if we're going to put in tennis courts, not only does it meet our local need for our local league players and people recreationally, but it gives us that piece of a puzzle that allows us to be a sports tourism destination and a sports tourism player in tennis in this region. Involve community leaders. And I know I've got mayors and aldermen, and I'm again, not wanting to step on anybody's toes. Community leaders does not necessarily mean political leaders. It can be the people who are in charge of your Rotary Club, your Civic Club, people who run your churches, the key banker in the city, the key person that might be handling your real estate agent or your insurance agent. It's the people who have a pulse on what's going on with the community and the people in the community and can help become the advocate to be the salesperson. Russ lives in Hattiesburg. In Hattiesburg, it was the mayor that did it. In other communities that we've seen and been associated with, it may be just a big stakeholder in the community. It may be the Main Street Association that takes the lead and makes the run with it. somebody's got to be the keeper of the flame and be the one to spearhead and help organize and push. Involve these leaders every step of the way. And keep in mind that if you go in for 2% and it looks like you're getting some resistance, 1%. City of Pascagoula, if I'm not mistaken, it's 1%, they did $8 million. So there's a big impact that can be done with 1 or 2%. Try to make the percentage fit what people are comfortable with. If you're restaurateurs, because with your lack of number of hotel rooms, you're probably looking more at restaurants than you are at hotels. You know, it's got to be something that they can bite off and take a bite of and feel comfortable about. What's the best approach? The best approach is the one that fits your community. Hattiesburg right there is out of 18 projects. For Hernando, it might be, look, we're going to take 3 projects, we're going to come up with $4 million, and here's the 3 things we're going to do. We sell it for 6 or 8 months, we do all the things we have to do through the legislature, we come back, have our vote, we get it approved, and in 2 years' time, we come back to the public and say, look, we told you we were going to do these 3 things, they're done, and now we want to do these 3 things. So you supported us here, you know we did what we told you we were going to do, we followed through, now help us do the next 3. And start building a stepping stone. Maybe you don't do the whole bite at one time, maybe it's a lot of individual bites over a period of time. It's got to be honest and transparent. Got to, you know, how you're going to address the needs of the people. You want a good cost estimate. If you're saying you're going to spend $4 million, you don't want to put it on the street and all of a sudden take $1 million. Obviously, the thing you run into there is time. If you're start working on a plan and doing things over time, I'm in a couple projects now where all of a sudden the steel prices just in the last 4 months have gone up 15%. So it's you want to hit those estimates so it'll be as close as you can be, so that if people are saying, I'm backing a $4 million bond issue, you're getting $4 million worth of product. And then, you know, it's a proposal on how you're going to pay for those solutions. Yes, it may be a bond issue. It may be that you're looking at a pedestrian plan. NRPA's got a 10-minute walk grant that's $50,000, and you can do a portion of that plan not through a 20-year bond, but through a 10% match grant or a 20% match grant. Look at all the avenues. Make sure that you've exhausted all your grant opportunities, all your sponsorship opportunities. You know, when you start dealing with the improvements on baseball fields, there's things that Major League Baseball does. So as you're approaching each one, Mississippi Tennis Association, if you start looking at tennis courts, they do grants. It may not be for the full price of 8 tennis courts, but you may get all your lighting paid for, you may get your nets paid for, you may get your fencing put up. So figure out a way to when you're taking out a bond that's going to go out over 20 years, if there's a way to take some of that piece of that pie and break it out into smaller chunks again and pay for it and get it out of the system quicker, it's always a good way to take a look at that. So, again, how to make a determination whether it's a bond, a tax, or other resources. Make sure you understand the demographics of the community. I feel like that we've tried to do, well, I know we have, we've done the best job we can do to provide you a feasibility study to say, here's what you have in the communities that you have. We're trying to make the pieces fit. We're not saying that we caught everything. Dwayne's going to have a different perspective. You as aldermen and our city council people, the mayor, y'all are all going to have a different perspective of saying, hey, this community needs this. So go back out and look at those geographically, look at them by the demographics. Take a look and see what fits who and where and what makes things make sense. Certain type of projects are more likely to be funded by others. Certain types of projects are more accessible to grant opportunities than others. So, you know, when you're putting them all on a sheet of paper and you've got 20 things, hey, if item 1 and 2 can get grant funded, or item 16 and 17, let's move those up to item 1 and 2. So you take that list, you figure out what it is, and then you start playing with it. And the biggest thing to take from this is it's a campaign. It can't be a one-off. I live in the city of Long Beach, down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. I work for Gulfport. I just watched Gulfport bundle a bond issue bigger than anybody I've seen in a long time. They didn't even get support within their whole council. So they sent it off to the legislature with a 6-1 vote and didn't even have full council support. Well, the legislature didn't let that happen. So make it a campaign, get your local citizens on board, get your leaders on board, get your stakeholders on board, get your administration and your politicians on board, take a good push to your legislative folks, and when it comes back for vote, have a plan. In our packet, we take that plan all the way down to the day of the bond. You know, how to get people out to vote 2 weeks ahead of time, 4 weeks ahead of time, 6 weeks ahead of time. The timing of the vote, when do you do it? When's the best time to put it so that you're gonna get the best response for the people that you want to respond? Maybe you don't put it in with a general election vote or a council vote or a mayor vote. You put it in on its own ballot at its own time, at a certain time of year when you know people are gonna be around and available to come do it. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. It can't just be an arbitrary, let's go do a bond and a couple months later we do a bond. Have a plan, put it together. Most of the folks in here have run a campaign. It's the same as that. You want to run a campaign and make it logistically and logically flow on how you're going to do it and get the most input and get people to be a part of it. Again, in the actual study, we go into a lot more detail, but just because you've had a failed plan does not mean that you can't have a successful.
All right, thank you, David. That pretty much wraps up the presentation part. Like I mentioned before, kind of starting here in my immediate left, printed out several of the key slides that sort of tell the story of the process and the information that we gathered. If you don't look at them, but be sure to look at the proposed improvements, because I really just hit the high points on the improvements that have the most economic impact. That tells a bigger part of the story on the proposed improvements. And if you want to flip through the full draft of the plan, it's back there behind you. So thank you.
Online on our website.
She is going to upload the plan on the city website, post the link on Facebook, and so we'll have a.
This is the draft.
It's the draft, yeah.
Maybe we get a comment on the draft before we do the final.
Yes, it'll be posted, and I will accommodate the online comments before we finalize the draft. So thanks again. Like I mentioned, David and I'll be around to answer questions, and the room is yours.
Gulfport, is that Harrison County or Pizza? Does Gulfport use the funding from the county? Restricted to the city on the city.
Now there's some share, you have to make some invasive roads, and there's those types of arrangements on